Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to do a Vedic Astrology or Jyotish analysis for the upcoming lunar eclipse or chandra grahan that's coming on the 20th of October, so just a few days away, 2023. And I thought the overarching theme for this reading was unexpected endings allow for new ambitions. So let's get into it. Note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support, and it might take a minute or two to read the rest of this disclaimer. All right, if you're new to Vedic astrology, Jyotish, or my videos, I have a bunch of teaching videos on the subject. You can find them all in my concepts playlist. And whenever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject. Um, these sorts of videos, the interpretation videos, integrate a lot of different components. So if you're a beginner and you feel a little bit lost, you might go back or watch these first before this video to get a grounded foundation and get more understanding out of it. So introduction to the constellations or rashis, north, south, and east Indian style charts. Introduction to navigating a birth chart. The lugna, also known as the ascendant, rising sign, first house. Second house bhava symbolism, and that one I put in specifically for this talk because it's all about the second house, second bhava. Planetary aspects, natural benefic, malefic planets or grahas, nakshatras or lunar mansions, lunar and solar eclipses, chandra surya grahan. And this especially if you're looking for information about the astronomy of eclipses, general information about them, and then also the mythology from Indian culture point of view, and then also the different planets. So I have a whole planets or grahas playlist. And especially for this talk, I would look for symbolism of the moon, the sun, Rahu, and Ketu, because those are the planets that create eclipses. All right, so let's just talk a little bit generally about eclipses in Jyotish and what they indicate. So eclipses are caused by an alignment of the sun, the moon, Rahu, and Ketu. Rahu and Ketu are related. Rahu is considered to be the head of a snake, if we take that as a symbol, and Ketu is considered to be the tail of a snake. Okay, and the energies associated with these two planets, Rahu is like quite a bit like Saturn, where there's some ambition, and also in addition to being very excuse me, in addition to being very Saturn-like, there's also this added notion of ambition and also psychic energy. And K2 is quite a bit like Mars. There's also this kind of separation or spiritual energy attached to it. Both Rahu and K2 are not, actual planets with mass. They're considered to be shadow planets or chaya grahas, and they're both considered to be natural malefics. Um, and they're not planets per se, like something tangible, that kind of planet, but they're actually calculations. And so Rahu and K2 are 2 points on the moon's path when it crosses the ecliptic, which is the solar path. Now, the symbolism of Rahu and Ketu, very, very briefly, again, I have a whole video on them. Things like illusion, delusion, confusion, obsession, a lot of mental chatter, a lot of mental churning, things that are masked or hidden, events that are hidden or masked, sudden, unexpected, unusual, unpredictable events, or people or things. Um, in the medical world, we think of Rahu Ketu when you have diseases that are hard to detect or cure because you can't see them. Things like Lyme's disease, for example. Also, things like COVID, a viral infection that, as you experienced probably yourself over the last few years, was not only about viral infection that was hard to detect and hard to cure, but also caused a lot of mental upset with globally. Mental illness is related to Rahu Ketu, and then if we think about careers, people like magicians, spies, actors, they all use illusion to support their career in various ways. Also, around the eclipse time, there tends to be heads of state tend to be born around this time, and famous heads of state that actually were born on eclipses that are very close to eclipses. People like Donald Trump, King Charles of the UK, and Prince William of the UK. Also around eclipse time, because again, we're talking about unusual events. This often is a time when you see like unusual world records being broken, or historical world events, that sort of thing. Um, yeah, so actually, like the attack of Israel happened right about the time of the previous eclipse on the 14th, and it'll go down in the history books, for better or worse. And what I see on a day-to-day basis in my own life is that basically through eclipse season, and eclipse season is there's usually two eclipses that come together. They usually come in pairs. Once in a while, there's a third eclipse. They happen 2 weeks apart. And so, if you're sensitive to the energy of Rahu, Ketu, and eclipses, I start to see about 2 weeks before the first eclipse, and then definitely the 2 weeks between the two eclipses, and then 2 weeks after. So 6 week period, more or less. And if there's three eclipses, it's an 8 week period. But just every day, there's something unusual that happens. And I used to actually write it down. Now I don't write it down anymore. I just sort of expect the unexpected. And I think that's all you can really expect with eclipses. And it's not always a bad unexpected event. Sometimes it's a positive unexpected event. I kind of see it as an exercise in becoming more aware of where my biases are, and whether I tend to have more negative thoughts or negative expectations, or positive thoughts, positive expectations, because that seems to get turned on its head. Um, and I think in a way, my approach to that is I try to just be like, okay, it's just, let's clear out the clutter and clear out the dust in my mind, and just get back to a neutral open space. So I think there's some good that can come out of it, if you want to see it that way. All right, so this is the chart for October 28th, the lunar eclipse coming up, the Chandra Grahan. The specific time of this chart is 16:32 in the afternoon, and that's Eastern Standard Time. The day lord is Saturn, and the hora, or the hour lord, is Mars. The Lagna nakshatra, or lunar mansion, is Uttara Bhadrapada, and the moon nakshatra, or lunar mansion, is Ashwini. The dasha, or planetary period at this time, at this moment, is Ketu Saturn, Rahu Saturn. And so just looking at those planets, one, they're all malefic planets. They're also all tamasic planets, which, if you saw my video on constellation categories, you'll know more about what that means. But K2 and Saturn are a lot of separation, isolation, have a lot of isolation energies to them. And Rahu and K2 have the unexpected. So it kind of seems like just we're already starting to get a vibe here of just unexpected endings and separations. And because the day lord is Saturn, the hour lord is Mars, K2, Rahu are also involved. Saturn is very much about restructuring things, old things that have stuck around for a while, or will stick around for a while. But Saturn, Mars, K2, and Rahu, they tend to symbolize things that are immaterial. And so, and because they're also tamasic planets, there may not be a lot of clarity of mind, but there's also this notion of, what do we say, very mechanical, very structured. These planets are not about heart. They're not about spirit. They're not. They don't. None of them indicate people. So it's sort of like when I saw these, sort of malefic, tamasic planets, it was almost like um, starting to gain some clarity about old structures, or old, whether it's old structures of things, but old structures related to like relationships, and rearranging them, like almost sort of mechanically, or almost like an engineer, with a bit of like coldness, a bit of detachment, that sort of thing was already what I was getting here. Okay. The other thing is that, in terms of context, besides this particular moment, 2 days after this moment in time, Rahu and Ketu are switching signs, which is a big deal because they're slow-moving planets. They only switch signs every year and a half. And so you can see these kind of twisted arrows here from the second house of the first house and then the eighth house of the seventh house. That's where Rahu and Ketu are moving 2 days after this moment. And so there's going to be a new direction and focus, especially because Rahu is going to be in the Lagna. The Lagna symbolizes the native of the chart, the personality of the body, the physique, things that are obvious about them when you first meet them. And Rahu is a planet about ambition and drive. So, like almost immediately, 2 days after this eclipse, there's going to be a new mission or drive, especially related to the self. Okay. So let's get into the chart here. So I always start at the top in the first house. So that's the top diamond, this being a North Indian style chart. And then to get to the other houses, you count counterclockwise. All right, so the Lagna or the first house, ascendant, rising sign, all different names for the same thing, is Pisces or Meena in Sanskrit, and the nakshatra is Uttara Bhadrapada. Okay, so already we're getting information here. Pisces is a dual water sign, so it's a emotional sign because it's a water sign, but also dual. So there's some wavering back and forth. Um, Dual signs waver. They're kind of dual-minded about things. And so there's going to be a dual-mindedness about emotions here. Okay, the other thing is about nakshatra Uttara Bhadrapada. The symbol of that nakshatra are the back legs of a funeral pyre. All right, so flames ending cremation and of people, right? Because a funeral pyre is about releasing, um, symbolically the soul from the body. And so that energy is playing out here throughout the chart, as we'll see. But the thing about Uttara Bhadrapada, there's the nakshatra right before it is Purva Bhadrapada, which are the front legs of a funeral pyre. And the Purva Bhadrapada energy is much more sort of intense and violent and that sort of thing. Uttara Bhadrapada, the star, the ruling star of that nakshatra is the sun. So the sun symbolizes things like the soul and the life mission, like purpose. So even though there's some emotional wavering about releasing and endings, and it looks like already we're seeing release and endings of relationships and people. That there's a higher purpose to it, like a higher mission to it. And so the again, the Uttara Bhadrapada energy compared to the Purva Bhadrapada energy is it can be seen as like renunciation. So not just destruction for the sake of destruction, but renouncing things, purposely renouncing things, like maybe downsizing your possessions just so you have more energy to focus on spiritual pursuits or that sort of thing. Yeah. Right. So, what else? The other thing about Pisces, Pisces is the 12th house for the natural zodiac. So the natural zodiac is when you take the first constellation or Aries and put it in the first house, and then that natural zodiac is actually you can kind of use that as a birth chart for the entire world. So, since Pisces is the last house in the natural zodiac, then there's this overlying energy of the 12th house. The 12th house is related to endings, it's related to completion, it's related to loss, it's related to foreign things, it's related to isolation. So, you can see that, like, already, without going too deep into it, um, these energies are already starting to. Um, Sorry, I have something in my eye. I'm trying to like read and through one eye and get it out as I'm talking to you. You can see that there's already this. We're starting to get multiple layers indicating the same thing here. Okay. Then the Lugnatia or the ruling planet of the chart is Jupiter because Jupiter rules Pisces. Jupiter in this chart is retrograde. It's in the nakshatra Bharani. Bharani is symbolized by the womb. So Bharani nakshatra brings an energy of like births as well as endings. So again, we're getting we're getting more of this, birth, ending, cycle of life type stuff. And Jupiter's gone to the second house. So I just did a whole video on the second house just a few days ago. actually anticipating this video. I wasn't planning on doing it, or I was going to do it later. But then when I saw this coming up, I'm like, oh, well, people might want to know more about the second house. So that's available to you. But the second house is an artisthana. Artisthana means a house of wealth. And if what's really amazing about this chart is literally every planet except K2, because it's not possible for K2. Every planet in this chart is touching or aspecting energy into the second house. So the second house is a major, major point of focus here. All right, so I circled in gray, we have Jupiter retrograde with the moon and Rahu conjoined in the second house. From the 12th house, in the 12th house, we have Saturn retrograde in its own sign of Aquarius, and that aspects 3 houses away. So Saturn aspects its light or energy into the second house. Then directly opposite the second house is the 8th house, where we have Mercury, Sun, Mars, all those planets aspect into the second house. Then we have a parivartana yoga, or exchange of houses between Venus and Sun. So you can visualize, in your mind's eye, swapping Venus and Sun. And that means Venusian energy is also aspecting the second house. So that's pretty amazing right there. And since Jupiter is the ruling planet of this chart, that means all these different planets with all their different energies and all their different, positions or whatever and strengths are all on the ruling planet of this chart. That means that probably there's this feeling of overwhelm and a bit of confusion. Again, that's also playing into the Rahu Ketu-ness of these placements, or mix in this placement. Um, and just sorting through all the different things that these planets symbolize, and all these planets symbolize everything in existence. So the thing, though, is that we do start to see that actually what's being sorted through in the overwhelmings of sorting through all this stuff is that actually the stuff is more about relationships than it is about material things. Material things do play into this, but I think the real core nugget to this energy is it's really about relationships, sorting through relationships. The reason why is that if we look at the second house with Jupiter, Moon, and Rahu in it, Mars directly opposite in the 8th house is aspecting into the second house. The second house here is ruled by Aries, which is ruled by Mars. So when we have Mars aspecting into its own house, it protects the house, but specifically the non-living items related to the house. Okay, and the second house is all about wealth. It's all about material things like literally money, bank accounts, um, movable assets, finances, what else? Clothing, jewelry, perfumes, like all these kind of other symbols of wealth, like all these, but material symbols. Yeah. It's not about spiritual wealth necessarily or emotional wealth, right? So Mars, by aspecting into its own sign, protects that house, and the non-living items associated with that house. Now, if we look at the parivartana between Venus and Sun, when you swap Venus and Sun, Sun goes back to its own house in Leo, and Venus goes back to its own house in Libra. So again, because you have a planet in its own house, it protects the house in terms of the non-living items associated with the house. So even though, like, we've got this crisscross across the chart with the second house, the 6th house, the 8th house, and the 12th house, like somebody might look at this initially and be like, oh my, look at that. We have three negative houses, dushtanas, the 6th house, 8th house, and 12th house. And there's truth to that, but you're getting some protection of non-living things. Then the 12th house, we have Saturn, Swa in its own sign retrograde. So Saturn, since it's in its own sign, is protecting the 12th house. And the 12th house specifically is about, well, actually the 6th house, 8th house, 12th house are about different kinds of losses, but the 12th house is like about almost any kind of loss. So in all, even though you have this mega conglomeration of all these planets, we're getting protection of non-living things in all of these houses. So what's left is relationships and people. So there's this churning, sorting through relationships and people. I think it is attached to money because again, the second house is related to money. The eighth house is also you have these Mercury, Sun, Mars, and when you do the exchange, parivartana exchange, Venus, all aspecting to the second house, and the eighth house is about others people's money. Yeah. So what I can see here is almost like a some kind of financial matter. It may seem like there's a financial matter that's on the table, and that's the issue. But the real issue is how are all the people involved here, and everybody is involved here because all these planets are, conglomerating. How are people responding and reacting to each other? Um, and the thing about this moment is, unfortunately, what I've seen in my own life and other people's lives is sometimes when money comes up, that's when you really see somebody's true colors. Like, are they helpful? Do they run away? Are they, maybe somebody's been in your life for decades and all of a sudden, money becomes tight for you for the first time in your life and then they disappear and you're like, oh, I guess they were just a fair weather friend. And that can all be very disturbing. Um, but at the same time, and again, that's that veiling quality, right? Maybe just because the circumstances didn't present themselves, you didn't know this about somebody or you had a different idea about somebody. But then when the circumstances change, you start to see other aspects of somebody that you haven't experienced before, and more of their true colors come forth. And that can be disturbing because you have a certain idea of somebody, or uh, maybe there's something, pretty malicious going on here. Um, and even though it is disturbing, there is a silver lining because there is truth and there is clarity here. Okay. The other reason why there's truth and clarity here, despite the circumstances, is that most of these planets are hidden. You can't see them. Like Rahu and Ketu are always hidden. That's their nature. The moon is going to be eclipsed. You're not going to be able to see the moon. Um, Mercury and Mars are combust, meaning they're so close to the sun, you can't see them. So you can't see Mercury and Mars. So the only planets you can see in the sky are going to be Venus, Sun, Saturn, and Jupiter. So only 4 of 9 planets. And luckily, two of those, luckily Sun is a sattvic planet. It's a spiritual planet, so that's good, even though the sun can be intense and fiery. But Jupiter and Venus are the two great benefics, and Jupiter is all about justice and truth and balance, wisdom and intuition. And Jupiter is also the spiritual counselor. Venus is the worldly counselor. So luckily, Jupiter and Venus um, are visible, and so the outwardly things may actually look and seem okay. The thing though is especially because this eighth house, and you can see this big green circle there, those 4 planets, when you get 4 planets in one house, we call it a pravraja yoga. And that's an indication, that's a planetary combination that indicates a area of focus or intensity. So in that eighth house, you do have K2, which is Sunday. It's in the last degree of the sign before it switches 2 days later. So that's going to make it unstable. And K2 on its own, that's the nature of K2 is very erratic and unstable and explosive. Then Mercury and Mars are going to be combust. When a planet is combust, it weakens the outward manifestations or symbols of those planets, but those the qualities of those planets are actually more intense internally. And Mercury represents things like communication and decision making, rational mind, analytical mind. And Mars, so with Mercury being combust, there may not be so much external communication, but there may be a lot of decision making going on that's not obvious. The other thing is Mars is also combust, and Mars represents things like siblings and enemies. And on top of that, as if that wasn't enough, Mercury and Mars, you can see they're in the same degree here. So at the time, as if there isn't enough going on with this lunar eclipse, Mercury and Mars are going to be in a planetary war for graha yuddha. And that's going to bring even more instability to Mercury and Mars, as well as the houses that they rule, which in this chart are going to be the second house, the what is it, fourth house, the read it, seventh house, and then the ninth house. Yeah. So, so the planetary war between Mercury and Mars, that can be literally like a uh, fight of words or fight of contracts, fight of business uh, with siblings. It could also mean things like harsh words, or finding out that a friend, because Mercury represents friend, is actually an enemy, Mars. It could be a fight between friends and enemies, or friends and siblings, that sort of thing. Yeah. So we have all that going on, and the eighth house also represents, besides representing things like other people's money, it represents deep psychology. So there's this big shift going on, especially because K2 is leaving the eighth house in a couple of days after this. Um, there's really like a deep inner conflict that will be resolved. And luckily, um, with the parivartana of Venus and Sun, Venus, the benefic energy of Venus, is going to smooth out to some extent all the stuff going on in the eighth house, this graha yudo planetary war. The other thing is that you can see Jupiter is also in the same degree opposite to Mercury and Mars. So I think what happens here is that, like, on the same day, within a few hours of this lunar eclipse, I think Mars goes first. Yeah, Mars is going to be in a direct, exact aspect with Jupiter. So Jupiter is, I think, going to give it a lift. And a few hours later, there's going to be Jupiter is going to have an exact aspect with Mercury. So Jupiter is also going to lift up Mercury. So luckily, again, there's some cushioning here, to smooth things out a bit. But I don't, because of these other energies of like funeral pyre and life and death and cycles and this sort of thing, um, there will be endings. So it may not be outwardly a blow up fight, but it may be that when you see how other people are responding to things, like if there is inheritance, for example, and this could indicate fights with siblings, there may not be like a violent shouting match, but based on maybe the way your siblings or friends are behaving, you're like, you know what? I changed my mind about this person, even though I thought we were really close, or we were really, on the same page. Clearly, we are not. And so internally, and even though it may not be obvious, like there may not be I'm never going to speak to you again or see you again type thing, but internally, there's going to be a shift um, based on because of a new viewpoint of um, of what these circumstances bring up. So anyway, I try to, when I go through these charts, I try to go through house by house so that it's a little bit more kind of logical or linear. But then sometimes the energy of charts just sort of takes me on a wave. So it looks like I just was on a wave. So anyway, let's go back to the text here so I don't miss anything. Um, so Venus, so backtrack a little bit. So Venus is in the nakshatra of Purva Phalguni. Purva Phalguni it's represented by a hammock. So Purva Phalguni is a nakshatra that represents, the finer things in life and enjoyment and amusements and that sort of thing. Um, so it's usually a positive nakshatra. And again, that's where Venus is when it does a parivartana exchange of houses with Sun. Now, the thing is, Sun, Mercury, and Mars are all in the nakshatra of Swati. Swati is a fragile, restless energy because the symbol of that is a newborn grass blowing in the wind. So, whatever's happening here is a brand new, fragile start to something. So, whatever this chasm is between Mercury and Mars going on deep in the psychology, it's actually allowing for new growth, because potentially this old viewpoint of somebody or this old relationship was preventing growth moving forward. And again, because we know Rahu and Ketu are shifting signs, Rahu specifically into Lagna, it may be that by releasing these old energies, relationships, or allowing them to shift and change, allows one to bring energy back to self and focus on self. Um, So yeah, K2, it's Sunday I mentioned, so in the last degree makes it unstable, but K2 is in the nakshatra of Chitra. Chitra is symbolized by a gemstone. So it's all about structure with Chitra. And clearly there's some structural changes. Again, K2 is an explosive planet. Um, so it's like blowing up old structures. That energy is part of this. Mercury and Mars, I mentioned, are combust, planetary war, exact aspect with Jupiter, I mentioned that. Um, then we also have Saturn retrograde Swa in Dhanistha in the 12th house. Luckily, Saturn just moved into Dhanistha because it was in Satabhisha nakshatra, which is translated as 100 healers. And so it could have been seen as, since Saturn is about structure and chronic disease and even death and things like that, and Satabhisha is usually when you have a malefic planet there indicates things like chronic disease and things that are hard to heal. Luckily, Saturn just recently, a week or two ago, shifted into Dhanistha, which is symbolized by a drum. So the drum beat is like rhythm, right? And so you're getting like uh, more structured or a shift in rhythm here. So that's a better nakshatra, I think, to be in potentially than a Shatabisha, which can be pretty virulent. And Saturn has been in Shatabisha most of the summer, so it was pretty intense, I think, for a lot of people this summer because of Saturn being so strong in its own house, retrograde in Shatabisha. And it will actually return to Shatabisha in November, I believe, towards the end of November. So, before it goes progressive. So this is kind of the reverse motion of Saturn restructuring things before there's long-term forward movement. Um, so again, all of this stuff, all of these energies focused, bringing it back to the second house. It's all about sorting through what you truly value, because again, the second house is all about material things and wealth and things that you value and things that support you. Um, and things that bring gains to your life. So it's not just about sorting through things you truly value, but whom, again, relationships and even self, because Jupiter, the Lugnatia ruling planet of the chart, is in the second house. So it's also, I think the sorting process is also about like how much do you value yourself in relationships, because some people lose themselves pretty easily. Um, and then again, fight between rational mind and actions. That's the planetary war between Mercury and Mars. Um, and again, the sorting process probably includes friends, enemies, siblings, although it may not be obvious because they're combust. But again, since all these planets are aspecting the second house, the moon represents mom, Jupiter represents children, Venus represents spouse, Mercury represents friends, Sun represents father, Mars represents siblings, and then Rahu represents maternal grandparents. Mercury also represents aunts and uncles. It's just again that's why there are all these individuals here, but it's sort of like who's going to make the cut. It's like that analogy or theoretical kind of question that sometimes people ask, like, oh, if your mother and your brother were both drowning, which one would you save? It's almost like that kind of thing, except that I would change that kind of analogy to if you and your mother and your brother and your grandfather were all drowning, who would you save first? And that's the thing is, based on this, it might be, the only way to potentially save the other people is you have to save yourself. Yeah. So, it's like put your own oxygen mask on first, that type of thing. Again, regarding money, because the second house represents money, and also the eighth house represents other people's money. So I think there are money issues here, but that's not the money. It's not really about the money. The money's just a kind of a symbol because money is neutral, but different people have different ideas about money. For some people, money means respect. For other people, money means power. For other people, money means burden. Money is neutral, but people have different ideas about what it means. And it's those perspective and values that are really at war here and that are going to be potentially disturbing, but also an opportunity to get clear about what people are really about, and then make new decisions and choices about moving forward, in terms of who stays and who goes. Because the second house not only represents money, but it represents family, and not just nuclear family, but extended family, and even like friends who are, close people, like friends who are like family. So after this moment of sorting through or energy of sorting through. It's kind of like who's going to be in your inner circle moving forward. Looks like there's going to be some shifts and changes. So, also the eighth house that represents deep psychology. We talked about, restructuring there, bringing truth and justice to light. That's Jupiter in the mix here. Um, the other thing is that there's a papakartari yoga. Papakartari yoga is it's like a necklace of negative planets or malefic planets. And there's a papakartari yoga. Um, we have one around the lugna because Saturn is in the 12th house on one side of the lugna, and then you have Rahu on the other side. So that means that when you have a papakartari yoga, it means that there are difficult circumstances that somebody usually has to kind of push up against. We also have um, potentially a papakartari yoga around the seventh house when you do the exchange of houses. So when you exchange Venus and Sun, you're going to have Sun in the 12th house to the seventh house if you want to spin the chart to the seventh house. And then you're going to have K2, Mercury, Mars in the second house. So there's going to be another papakartri or kind of a necklace of negative planets around the seventh house. So it also means the seventh house is related to spouse, but also relationships, partnerships, especially business related partnerships. So they both can be challenged here. I think I mentioned most of this. Pravraja. Also, Balarishta yoga, that's here in this chart. So the Balarishta comes from Venus, K2, Mercury, Sun, Mars, Saturn in negative houses. So that's, what is that? 6 out of 9 planets are in negative houses. Typically, when we see a Balarishta in somebody's chart, that may be an indication that there are difficult beginnings or difficult childhood, and sometimes so difficult that there's actually demise of somebody. So again, this also ties in with this kind of fragility that comes through with Mercury, Sun, Mars, and Swati nakshatra. Again, that newborn grass, blowing in the wind, and then you also have this Jupiter. Again, you're seeing like convergence of these different energies here. Jupiter is in the nakshatra Bharani again, symbolized by a womb. So beginnings and endings, birth and death, that sort of thing. It's just Shastukas I talked about. Again, letting go of things and people who might be sort of what did I write here? Kind of long term, but like outdated. And there might be some really deep attachments here. So that's why, there's this waffling, right? This dual water sign energy in Pisces. I don't think this is like going to be an easy letting go. It looks like this is a deep restructuring. Um, and so there's another analogy that I've heard. Like sometimes you hear like some people come into your life for different reasons, season, or lifetime. I kind of like the analogy. It's similar. The analogy of some people are leaf people, some people are branch people, and some people are trunk or root people. And so some people, the root or trunk people are people with you who are for a long term and your lives and your consciousness and your um, experience of each other and in life together is deep and long and supportive, like it's a foundational type of relationship. And then the branch people are people who are sort of like that, but to a lesser extent, like maybe they're in your life for a long time, but then after, I don't know, 5 or 10 years or something, it just, it seems like it's time to move on. And then there are a lot of leaf people, right? People you meet at the bus stop who you don't even speak to, and you just, maybe say hello or something on the bus and never see them again. So, but the thing here is that, again, the surprise element is that people that you thought were branch people were actually more leaf people, or people you thought even more deeply were root people were actually more branch people. Um, yeah, so that's where the surprise seems to be. But there's again with Jupiter being there and Venus being there, there's good counsel, grounded practical counsel from Venus and spiritual counsel from Jupiter. Um, So there's going to be some clarity that's going to come to help with choices and decisions that need to be made. Um, and The other thing is that, it seems like there's going to be, again, more of a thought, there's going to be more of a thoughtfulness. Like it might, because Venus and Moon are both emotional planets, but again, because of the day lord, hour lord, Dasha sequence, that sort of thing, it's almost like needing to take a step back away from the deep emotional attachments that can cloud our judgment and be like, you know what? As surprising as it is, as disappointing as it is, I think I need to make a different choice moving forward. So, and then again, after this sorting through, culling through, and kind of a deep reestablishment within self regarding perception and motivation of relationships, then Rahu and Ketu are going to shift. Signs a couple days later, and there's going to be more of a motivation to develop self, especially with Rahu in the look. The other thing I'd mention, because you have all these planets on top of each other, how do you sort through? Like, what is this? So, one, if you know what your specific dasha or planetary period is, that will tell you in your own chart which planets are going to be more prominent or influential in this moment. But the other thing is that, again, in this chart, the sort of collective reading that I'm doing, the strongest planets are going to be Saturn because it's in its own sign, Sun, um, because when you do the parivartana exchange, Sun is going to go back to a sun sign, Venus is going to go back to a sun sign. So Saturn, Sun, and Venus are the strongest planets. And the strongest house is going to be the second house. So again, back to the second house, because you have Mars aspecting into its own house, even though Mars is combustible planetary, where even though Mars is beat up pretty well, it's still going to protect the house to some degree. But you also have Sun aspecting the second house where Aries is, and Sun is exalted in Aries. And both Sun and Mars are fiery planets. Fiery planets are very transformational. So again, more transformation, more fire, more, the funeral pyre again. There's convergence here of a lot of these energies. Right. So we always have to qualify eclipses in terms of where they're visible in the world because their energies will play out more. And as you can see from this chart, most of the world will be able to see the eclipse if they so choose. The exception to be western part of the North and South America. Central America is off the hook. Some islands in the Pacific Ocean, Caribbean, and then most of Antarctica will not be able to see this eclipse. So the energy is going to be a little bit lighter there. So because of the things I mentioned with like money and relationships, I decided to go through the amshas or subcharts, the divisional charts of money, assets, and then relationships to see what pops up and see if there's a correlation between the birth chart, the natal chart, and the subchart. So first, the money houses. So I looked here, and just as a reminder, the Dasha sequence is Ketu, Saturn, Rahu, Saturn, and that shifts on December 6th of 2023. So about a month later after the eclipse, a little bit more than a month later, we're going to shift to Ketu, Saturn, Jupiter. Okay, so the money houses, I looked at D4, which is the Chatratamsha. These are this is a chart for large assets. Then I looked at the D10 to Shamsha, that's the career and fame. Subchart D11, Rudramsha, which is income. Let's go through one by one. And again, what I've done is I've circled the Dasha or planetary period planets so you can see their location and their relationship to each other. So this first chart here at the top, the four large assets. If we look at K2, Casey's in the eighth house. Oh, the other thing about this D4 is that I circled the 12 at the top here. It's the same lugna. The D4 has the same lugna as the natal chart. That usually means that there's more importance given to this chart. So, and the D4 can be related to things like property or large amounts of money, like a retirement plan, houses, that sort of thing. So K2 is in the eighth house. Again, other people's money. It's What can we say about that? Well, let's look at the other planets. So Saturn's in the 12th house again of loss. It's retrograde in its own house. That's strong, so it protects loss um, of um, of non-material things. It is aspecting, as it is in the natal chart, onto Rahu, because Rahu is again in Aries. So, yeah, so we have a recreation of Rahu K2 on the 2-8 axis. We have Saturn back in the 12th house. We have a reconformed Lugna. Oh, that's what I was going to mention about K2. So the Croatia, or the ruling lord of the house that K2 is in is Venus, and Venus is strong because Venus is in its other sign, Taurus, in the third house. And especially in the subzodiac analysis, one thing you can assess with K2 and Rahu is that if their lords are strong, that makes them better in the subzodiacs. You don't necessarily use that in the natal chart. So because K2 is in the sign of Venus and Venus is in its own sign, that actually pulls K2 up. So, that's potentially good. But you have K2 and Saturn and in the 8th house and the 12th house. And even when we move to December 6th, those planets are still going to be running. So large assets look like um, there's going to be some challenge there. Um, and again, that Saturn aspecting onto Rahu, um, it's going to challenge the second house things. Rahu is also strong because it's in the sign of Mars and Mars is with it. So that's going to strengthen Rahu. Um, so again, that's going to prop up the non-living things. But again, this loss, this potential inheritance, it's going to stress the family and the people who are close to the native. Yeah. And then the D10 Dashamsha, this is career and fame. So again, if we're looking at the Dasha planets, now we have K2 in the 11th house of income and clubs, group, society, friends. Saturn and Rahu are in the 5th house of counseling. And again, you have Rahu and K2 in Aries, Libra. K2 is strong because Venus is aspecting into that house, so that props up K2. Rahu is more unstable for a couple reasons. Saturn is debilitated in Aries. That's going to bring some shakeup to Rahu, even though they're all in positive signs. So all the first of all, I should say, before I start parsing it, K2, Jupiter, Rahu, Saturn, they're all in positive signs in the career and fame. So that's not, there might be a little bit of rock and roll, but nothing compared to all this other stuff going on. So it's mostly good actually in the D10, even though I started talking about kind of some negative stuff. So Saturn is debilitated in Aries. That's going to destabilize Rahu. Also, Venus is there. Venus is the sole enemy of Rahu. So we don't generally like the sole enemy with its partner. Then the thing is, this Jupiter here, retrograde, is actually in a parivartana with Mercury, which is nice because when you do the parivartana, that's going to make Jupiter super strong. So that's going to help things out when December 6th rolls around. But for the most part, the career fame T10 looks pretty good. D11, the Rudramsha, this is income. So K2 and Rahu are in negative house, third house, which also indicates changes and endings. And again, you have Saturn aspecting, it's Saturn's retrograde in its own sign aspecting onto Rahu K2. That's going to bring some instability there. But you also have Mars, again, aspecting into Aries. And because Mars is aspecting its own sign and Rahu and Ketu are there, that's going to help prop up Rahu and Ketu. And you also have Jupiter aspecting Rahu and Ketu. So there is some change here with income. But again, it looks like it's protected. It's not like it doesn't look like something where somebody's going to be like hemorrhaging cash for a long period of time. And also Saturn is super strong. And since Saturn is running in this current Dasha period, and then even after December 6th, that's going to help a lot. Uh, yeah, so income, there might be some challenges here, but it doesn't look like it's going to be too major. So again, the money stuff look, they're a little bit of shakeup, but it didn't look too bad. Then let's look at people. Now you're going to see it's a very different subcharts here. All right, so what I have here lined up on the left top, I have the D3, the Dracana. This is a sibling chart, subchart. Then under that, on the left, lower left, there's the D7, the subtamsha, that's children. Then on the upper right, we have the D9, Navamsha, that's spouse, subchart. Then on the lower right, we have the D12, the Dwadashamsha, this is parents and grandparents, all right? So let's start on the upper left, the D3 Dracana, sibling. This one is a mess. So I'll just say that first, and then we'll go through it. But looks like there's a lot of issues going on with siblings here, and we could see that right again in the natal chart. There was that Mercury, Mars, planetary war, combustion in the eighth house. Again, the friend, or the clash of business with siblings, money, communication with siblings. We'll see it all recreated here in the Draconet. So, again, the other thing is the Legna is again a Pisces Legna. So that also indicates that this D3 Draconet chart is important, even more important to look at. So let's see. Again, the Dasha sequence is K2 Saturn, Rahu Saturn. So K2 is in the eighth house again. So you can see it's like, again, we have Rahu Ketu on the 1-7, the Aries Libra axis again in the 2-8, the 2-8 it's like pretty much all recreated. And you have Jupiter, even though Jupiter's in the sixth house, it aspects 9 houses away, so you get Jupiter back on Rahu, in the um second house. And then look at this. So then you have, so Jupiter is the sole enemy of Venus, and Jupiter's aspecting on Venus. Then you have Venus is the sole enemy of Rahu. So you have this like doubling up of sole enemy energy in the second house of family and people who are close to the native. So, and again, this is sibling. So looks like there's some pretty intense sibling issues, if not sibling rivalry going on here. And that looks like it's going to be lasting a while. Uh, then you also again have Saturn back in Aquarius in its own sign, retrograde, aspecting its energy onto this Rahu. And again, Saturnian energy is debilitated in Aries. So that's not doing any favors to the second house, especially the living beings associated with the second house. Then with Saturn, we have Mars, Mercury, Sun. So again, this whole planetary war combustion thing is here in the 12th house. So looks like there's losses here related to siblings, related to communication, related to business matters. So it looks like siblings might be fighting about money. And again, what the money or the assets represent to them. Um, what else? Oh, we also have, and then we have another soul enemy situation going on. So the moon is a soul enemy to Saturn, and the moon, you see this purple arrow. That's not helping Saturn in the 12th house here. So, but because Saturn is in its own sign in the 12th house, that does protect non-living assets, money, and things like that. Was there anything else here? K2 is supported a bit also because Venus aspects into Libra. So again, you kind of get this energy of some support for non-living things. You also have Sun aspecting into Leo here. So actually, this D3 is actually a lot like the native chart. So that's why I think sibling issues and rivalry might be quite a big thing here. Then if we drop down, lower left, the D7 subtamsha children. Again, K2, Rahu, Jupiter, all in positive signs. We do have Saturn in a sixth house. But we have this retrograde Jupiter exalted in Cancer in the 10th house aspecting on Saturn. So that's going to bring Saturn up quite a bit, and Saturn is, excuse me, Jupiter's aspecting into its own sign of Pisces. So it doesn't look like children are going to be hugely affected by this. And again, these are children of the native of the chart. Then if we go to upper, what is it? The upper right side here, D9 of Amsha, this is the spouse. Again, we have Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu, in positive signs. We do have Ketu um, in the third house, which is considered a bit negative. It's also the house of that relates to change and endings. So again, there might be a little bit of wave that comes to the way of the spouse of this natal chart, but it doesn't seem to be uh, potentially as long and deep um, for the spouse. It could also be, the third house represents siblings. If the native is having issues with the siblings because of like maybe an inheritance from the parents or something like that, then this K2 in the third house, because K2 is the separation energy planet, explosion, explosive planet. It could be that the spouse feels the strain of losing the brother-in-law or sister-in-law. That could be. But otherwise, it doesn't seem to be too long and deep of a problem for the spouse at the moment, except for that. And then the D12, the D12 is also pretty intense here. The Dwadashamsha, and this represents parents and grandparents. So you have K2, Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu, all the Dasha planets in 6th or 12th house. So the 6th house represents things like obvious enemies, and the 12th house represents losses. And again, you have this Mars Mercury thing going on. In the 12th house, Saturn is there and Aries, so Saturn's, is going to be destabilized. Um, you have Rahu there, so it's going to be unusual, ambition, drive. So it could be this, like, a lot of fighting, especially through communication, that sort of thing. It might also indicate lawyers and lawsuits because across away from each other, you have Mars with Jupiter, and usually when you get a Mars Jupiter combination, that can indicate law. What else do you have here? Also, nope. Let me hold back on that. Hold on a second. Um, luckily for K2, the Lord of Libra, the constellation it is Venus, and Venus is in its own sign in Taurus, so that's going to bring up K2 a bit. But again, K2 is a separationist, erratic, explosive planet, and that's in the house of obvious enemies. Also, Jupiter represents children, so that gets back to if the subchart, the D12 is the subchart of the parents, that means that the children of the parents, meaning the native of the chart and their siblings, are fighting. so, so it all goes back to that. So it looks like, there's a blowout with siblings here is the real problem. Or sibling-like relationships. It doesn't have to be actual blood relationships, but, maybe somebody who's been in your life a long time, who's like a brother or sister or something like that. Is there much else here? Yeah, the other thing is Mars is a solar enemy of Mercury. So not only do you have this like combustion, combust, graha, yuta, planetary war, but you have soul enemies in the 12th house of losses for the parents. So, this is like, again, the sibling rivalry is really quite a loss of the parents. Um, Although again, there's protection related to the non-living things associated with the church. So yeah, so siblings definitely. I think that's the main, kind of blow up thing here. And then right behind that is parents, but it looks like children, spouse. It's not as they're not in the direct line of fire. I guess that's what I'm getting from all this. So definitely these charts are much more challenged than all the money related charts, as you can see. Alrighty, so general Jyotish suggestions during eclipses. Now that you kind of know what the energy of this one is about. It's generally not the best time during eclipses to begin a new project that you want to be straightforward, long-term stable, because again, the nature of Rahu and Ketu, which are important components of the eclipses, are not about being straightforward. It's about being hidden, unexpected, um, which is totally up to you. If that's how you prefer to do things, and you need some excitement in your life, then by all means, go for it. But if you're looking for a smooth, um, more stable course, then it's probably not the best time. Especially 3 days before and after the eclipse, typically it's advised not to begin major life events such as things like marriage, building a home, entering a home, or traveling to a new place. Because again, all this chaotic energy can upset things. And during eclipses, things and people may be eclipsed, so they might move out of your life or be unseen. And this might be a temporary situation or permanent. Also, during this time, there's a thinning of the veil typically between the material and spiritual worlds. And so you might find that you're more intuitive or you're dreaming more, or sometimes you see kind of the cycle of life occurring in the family, like there's a baby born and the grandparent passes away all within a week or two of each other. That sort of thing tends to happen around eclipses. Because again, that the veil between the material and spiritual world, like spirits and souls, are coming and going, sort of thing. Surprising outcomes, events, plot twists, both positive and negative, expect the unexpected. That's kind of all you can expect during eclipse season. And you can't, I don't suggest fighting it. You can't really fight it anyway. You can't outrun your karma. But, take it easy. I don't tend to schedule much around eclipse times, because I typically don't want a lot of that chaotic energy involved in my activities. But it's nice to kind of take it easy, lay low, take your foot off the gas, slow down a bit, and do other things like maybe more spiritual things rather than try to get ahead in your career or something. Also, it's suggested not to look directly at eclipses, unlike like in the Western world, people drive hundreds of miles sometimes to see a big eclipse. But the more you look at it, the more you're going to kind of imbibe that energy. So it's up to you. But rather than start new things, again, more spiritual activities are suggested. So things like prayer, meditation, chanting mantras, making donations, charitable donations, cleaning, organizing, making things sattvic or pure. Whether it's like, almost like feng shui or Vastu Shastra, like organizing your space, cleaning the space, clearing out your inbox, that sort of thing, just to release old congested energy and make way for new fresh energy. Some people like to fast if that's medically appropriate. I wouldn't suggest anything extreme. Maybe just stay away from processed food or that sort of thing. Solar eclipses, people typically may feel very tired because the sun is so energizing. When that's eclipsed, you might feel like your battery died. Typically, with lunar eclipses, because the moon represents emotions and the intuitive mind, you might get some real deep psychological or emotional epiphanies. And again, since this is a lunar eclipse, the deep psychological or emotional epiphany is probably related to relationships and what people are really all about, and how you want to move forward with this kind of new information or perspective that you have on people in your life that have probably been there for a while. Um, the Western perspective, I'm not an expert on Western astrology, but I have heard, and I do feel that there's truth to it. The Western perspective on eclipses is that it's kind of a course correction to get you back on your true path. And I think that's true for this, even though there might be some disruption in relationships, long-standing relationships, but ultimately it's about revealing the truth so that there's less potential energy or resources being lost to maybe a personal relationship that wasn't what you thought it was. So that's the lunar eclipse coming up. As always, I want to thank you for your time and your interest in Vedic astrology, my work on the channel. All of my teaching videos are in my concepts playlist. I do offer individual birth chart readings on Zoom. If that's of interest, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com. I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine, including other Vedic arts like Ayurveda and yoga, as well as other paradigms of medicine, natural medicine like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. And the name of that YouTube channel is Nature Source Care, if that's interesting to you. So as always, I hope you found this whole talk interesting and useful as you navigate, and that again, hopefully, this sort of thing helps you navigate the energy cycles of your life, especially when they're really challenging. All right. So take care, and until the next one, namaste.